Okay, today you're going to do the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula, you're going to find out what that is in a minute. So let's look here. What are the roots of x squared minus 9? Well, for the most part, we factor this. It's a difference of two perfect squares. And we find out that our roots are -3 and 3. And we can also see that if we put this on our graphing calculator, there is that graph, and the roots are where it crosses the x-axis. So it crosses the x-axis at -3 and +3. Remember, there's always two ways to do this. You can either factor it, or you can look at it on the graphing calculator. Okay, how about this next one? What are the roots of this equation? Well, I'm going to factor this. And this factors out to, and I only have one root here. Well, let me go look. Here's my graphing calculator, and here's what it looks like. And indeed, it only crosses the x-axis at 2. Now this is a y-intercept. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a root. And a root is down here where it crosses the x-axis. So this doesn't have roots. It only has one root, and it happens to be the number 2. Let's do another one. If I factor this, I see that it should be roots of 4 and -3. So if I look at my graphing calculator again, there we have it. It crosses at -3, and it crosses at 4. So far you're probably going, all right, what's up? What's going to happen now? Well, let's look at this next one. If I try to factor this, okay, two numbers that multiply to 5 are 5 and 1. Those are my only options, but in no way, shape, or form can I use a 5 and a 1 and get a -2. That's right. So this is where our quadratic formula comes in. So let's take a look at it, what it looks like on a graphing calculator. And if I look at my roots, look at those answers. They are -1.449 and positive 3.449. Well, those are not your answers. Those are approximations to your answers. We want the real, exact, precise answer, because that's what math is all about, precise. Physics is about approximation. Math is about preciseness. So, this is your quadratic formula. And yes, you are going to have to memorize that.
Opposite of B, opposite of B, plus or minus square root, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A, all over 2A.
All right, so how does the quadratic formula work? Notice the quadratic formula has the letters A, C, and B. Well, if we went back to the general form of a quadratic, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. And if we match these up with that equation we were just about to solve, this is what we figure out. We figure out that A is 1, B is a -2, and C is a -5. And if we plug those numbers into the quadratic formula, we will get those irrational roots that we saw on our graph. Remember, our answers were x equals -1.499 approximately, or 3.499 approximately. But we want the exact answer, so let's do the quadratic formula. Okay. X, which is my root, is found by taking negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times the c value all over double the a value. Okay, if we clean that up, negative 2 gets me positive 2. We'll talk about why it's plus or minus in a minute. Square root, let's see, can we do all this? Negative 2 squared is 4. 4. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 5, careful, is a plus 20 over 2. That gets me 2 plus or minus the square root of 24 over 2. That breaks down to 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, the square root of 6 all over 2. That is 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 all over 2. 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. Now, if you think I went through that very quickly, I expect you to go that quick. I expect you to realize that 24 can be broken down into radical 4 and radical 6. I expect you to realize that when you divide, this is saying everybody gets divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then this 2 and this 2 cancel out to a 1. So those are my precise answers. If I'm going to take this page, I'm going to clean it up now. Let's get rid of all this. If you were to take out a calculator and do this, x is 1 plus radical 6. And if you actually did that on the calculator, that's where you get the 3.499. If you did x equals 1 minus radical 6, that's where you'll get the negative 1.499. Those are approximations. But in math, we're looking for exact answers. And that's why there's a plus or minus. Because generally, a quadratic, a parabola, will cross the graph twice. So you need 2 roots.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a.
Wait, you're in my way.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. 2a.
All right. What are the roots of 4x squared, x plus 1? The first thing I have to do is set it equal to 0 so that I can see if I can solve it. And I can't factor this. Obviously, you're not going to be able to factor anything. They want you to use the quadratic formula.
Solve for x is negative. Quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. Gonna solve for x. We're gonna quadratic formula. Gonna solve for x all over 2a. Quadratic formula's gonna help me out. And the
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out my a value, which is always in front of the x squared, the b value, which is in front of the x, and then the c value, which is the person who's got no variable attached to it. Now it's just plug and play. Now all I have to do is take my formula and put my numbers in. Okay, so in for B is -1. In for B is -1. In for A is 4. In for C is -1. And in for A is 4. Now all I have to do is clean this up. -1 means it's +1, plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 4, that's 16, that's +16, so that's 17 all over 8. So I have two roots, because this is going to cross in two spots. One, where I take them and add them together, and the other one, where I take and subtract. Now, let's come over here to our graphing calculator, and let's put that in and see what happens. So I'm typing in 4x squared minus x minus 1. And there's my graph. All right, so let's see. This will give us approximation. See, it crosses twice at -0.39 and +0.64. So -0.39 and +0.64. So if I were to do this on my calculator, I should get these answers out as approximations. Okay, the last one we're going to do is this. Now, some of you may say, hey, Mrs. Trillin, this is easy. This factors. You're absolutely right. It factors. So the answers are, I only have a root at 4. But I'm going to use a quadratic formula just to show you something. X equals, now let me get my A value here is 1. My B value here is -8. And my C value here is 16. So if I do my quadratic formula, opposite of B, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. If I clean that up, 8 plus or minus the square root of, well, look what happens here, 64 minus 64. So that gives me 8 plus or minus the square root of 0, which is 8 plus 0, or 8 minus 0. So see what happens? Hopefully you noticed two things. One, the quadratic formula can be used whether you factor or you can't factor. And this is why there's one root. Because if you add 0 onto 8 and divide by 2, it's the same as if you subtracted 0 from 8 and divided by 2. You only get one answer, 4. And therefore, this parabola only crosses the x-axis once. Right? X squared minus 8x plus 16. Let's get rid of that other graph. And there it is. There it is, crossing only once at 4.
That's good.
Good job, Emily. What about the x equals?
X equals -b.
Huh?
X equals -b. Plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4ac. All over 2.